With a new change in Soviet and American leadership, 1953 showed promise of becoming a turning point in Cold War relations. But that did not come to pass. Instead, the crash of an American spy plane in Russia started another long chapter in Cold War history. Dwight Eisenhower, the former supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe, becomes America's president in 1953 and holds office until 1961. For his people, Ike embodies the toughness of a war veteran and the good common sense of the average man. That same year, the death of Joseph Stalin on March 5th gives the Soviet Union a new leader, Nikita Khrushchev. One of his first acts in office is to denounce Stalin's oppressive regime and loosen up some of the old political restrictions. It seems that a thaw may be coming in the Cold War. Since Eisenhower has been trying to rein in the Pentagon's military buildup and push for a nuclear test ban, the two men seem to see eye to eye. A summit meeting planned for 1960 shows promise for a reconciliation until a quirk of timing derails everything. While the summit is on hold, waiting for France to test their own atomic weapon, Gary Powers, the pilot of an American U-2 spy plane, is shot down over Russia. Khrushchev offers to believe that Eisenhower was never informed about the flights, but for Ike, the excuse of not knowing what his own government is up to is far too embarrassing at home. When Eisenhower refuses to apologize for the spy plane incident at the summit, Khrushchev walks out, beginning another chapter in the Cold War stalemate. No other city typified the Cold War confrontation quite like Berlin. Divided between Soviet and American-controlled sectors, the city served as a tiny model of a much larger conflict, the polar opposition of communism and democracy. And no event symbolized that opposition more clearly than the building of the Berlin Wall. It's been 16 years since the close of World War II and the occupation of East Germany by the Russian army. In those years, relations between the former Russian and Western allies have steadily cooled. Perhaps no point illustrates the mounting tensions between them better than the divided city of Berlin. Since the war, 2.5 million Berliners have fled the so-called German Democratic Republic for a life of freedom in West Berlin. Seated deep in the heart of Soviet-held territory, the city serves a tiny microcosm of the invisible Cold War brewing between the world's newest superpowers, the Soviets and the Americans. During a summit in 1961, President Kennedy meets with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to discuss the terms of a peace treaty between the two nations. Kennedy, who during his election campaign ratcheted up fears of a nuclear weapons gap between the U.S. and USSR, now attempts an overture of peace with the Soviets. But by now, the Cold War paranoia has spread to the Soviets as well.
3 men is in West Berlin. But that isolated outpost is not an isolated problem. The threat is worldwide. Our efforts must be equally wide and strong.
Kennedy's overture is struck down by the intense and bellicose Khrushchev. He demands nothing less than the surrender of West Berlin to Russia and makes it clear that if these terms are not met, it will mean war. Kennedy lets it be known that America will not deal on the issue of Berlin. If it's war Khrushchev wants, he will get it. But in an attempt to avoid what could be an apocalyptic confrontation, Kennedy leaves the Soviets a way out, East Berlin. The American president quietly lets it be known that he will not oppose a Soviet move to seal off the eastern part of the city.
The president expressed the continued interest of the American people and government in Berlin. He reiterated the determination of the United States, in cooperation with its allies, to preserve and maintain the freedom of the people of West Berlin, to which it is committed by treaty and convention.
At 1 a.m. on August 13, 1961, 50,000 East German police put up a fence of barbed wire, cutting the city in two. The Soviets call it the Anti-Fascist Protective Rampart, a measure taken for the safety of East Berliners. It's a stark equator separating East from West, poverty from prosperity, and captivity from freedom. Soon, the world will know it simply as the Wall. The flow of people over the border stops overnight, and bricks are laid in place of barbed wire. Towers are erected, and the wall is patrolled by men with guns. Their orders are to shoot to kill. People's lives are suddenly cut in two. Families are cut off, and lovers are separated from each other. Some people, desperate for freedom, choose to make a dash over the death zone, that narrow strip between American and Soviet fences separating two distinct worlds. Most make it, but they are the lucky ones. Over the long life of the wall, there will be 1,700 shootings, killing roughly 600 people. But in Kennedy's words, a wall is better than a war.